All right. Good afternoon. This is the American University Washington College of Law, so we have to do better than that. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's a WCL welcome. So welcome to the American University Washington College of Law, and I am honored to bring greetings for this program, Women in Courts. My name is Roger Fairfax, and I'm privileged to serve as Dean and Professor of Law here at the Washington College of Law. And although my schedule is triple booked as usual, I could not resist the opportunity to at least come and give a brief welcome. And I am thrilled to be in the company of such distinguished guests. The Honorable Marjorie Margolies, who will deliver the keynote address. And he will join in the conversation with WCL's own Manian, who's faculty director of our top-ranked health law and policy program. And you will also encounter a number of other distinguished panelists whom you will meet a little later this afternoon. You know, here at WCL, we pride ourselves on championing what matters. And in addition to the keynote discussion on gender and access to healthcare, today's program will evaluate some critical questions. How can we get more women serving on higher courts? And how might they influence the jurisprudence of those courts? And how can we reap the benefits that judicial diversity will bring? So I look forward to having you have the benefit of this rich discussion. And before I close, I want to thank the sponsors of this fantastic event, including the Institute for Women's Policy Research, the EU Erasmus program, Erasmus Plus, Women's Campaign International, AU School of Public Affairs, the Women in Politics Institute, of course, our Health Law and Policy program, and our Women in the Law program here at WCL, as well as WCL's program on international organizations, law, and diplomacy. So again, thank you for being with us today to discuss these critical topics affecting women in our courts, and welcome to the American University Washington College of Law. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Federica Bindi. I'm a senior fellow with the Institute of Women Policy Research and the PI of the grant on which we have been working for the last 2 years with Professor Nicola here, which I thank for all the help in organizing this and many other adventures we have organized along the years, I should say. I am thrilled to introduce Marjorie Margolies, the Honorable. She is a former Congresswoman. She is the best in everything she does as a journalist. And as a journalist, she won a Pulitzer. As a mother, she was the first one to adopt a Vietnamese child and went up to have 11, whether adopted, biological, or acquired. As a congresswoman, she was, as you will know, you will hear afterwards, she was the one who allowed the Clinton health administration to pass, even if she knew this would cost her own seat. As a champion of women leaders, she has trained endlessly women, ranging from high school girl with the girls program to presidents in various countries, from Liberia to Afghanistan. And so she will, I'm thrilled to have this conversation. A conversation will be moderated by Professor Manian. Professor Manian is your own professor here. She directs the health and law and public policy. She has a JD from Harvard, but you're also working on a PhD on medical sociology. I'm so curious. And so this is, I can't even think of putting myself to do a second PhD. I highly respect for you. Maya, I'll actually leave to you. For the people who are following us in streaming, you will be welcome to ask questions when the Q&A will come. Maya, off to you.
Actually, I think we're going to hear from Marjorie first, and then we'll follow. Yeah, and then we'll follow with a conversation and a Q&A with the audience, because I'd love to hear from Marjorie first.
Okay.
I teach at Penn, and usually this happens too. Everybody sits at the back of the room. Nobody has the gumption to, and this is not the way to start a conversation, but you guys always, and they do at Penn too. You say, I'm sorry, a lot, or perhaps I shouldn't say it this way, or perhaps this has been said before. All over the world, women do it about 80% more than men do. And you marginalize your next, whatever you're going to say. So practice. At Penn, in my classes, they apologize for apologizing. So I mean, I say this to you, all of you out there. Hi, I was told to tell you a little bit about me. It's kind of semi-interesting. Fed has told you a little bit. I started out as a journalist, and then I'm a Democrat. Okay. I tried so hard as a journalist to be sane center, moderate middle, which is where I think we should be going every place, especially in Congress. And I was with NBC for about 25 years. NBC, it's owned and operated station. I was here. Raise your hand. Thank you for saying he remembers me, which means that he's very mature. I was with WRC here, and then I contributed to the Today Show. And in 1991, I was living in Pennsylvania, which is where I was essentially brought up. I was living outside of Philadelphia in Montgomery County in a very Republican district. And a group of really odd, eccentric women came to me and said, why don't you run? Because I had a teeny little name recognition. On election night, I only had a concession speech. There was no way I was going to win, and I won by 1,000 votes. I mean, a tiny percentage. So in 1992, I went to Congress with if you're interested, I wrote a book about it too. The year of the woman, the first year of the woman, and then I left with Newt. Although Hillary says you got to feel sorry for somebody whose mother named him Newt. Anyway, I became the head of our delegation for the Beijing conference. And when we came back, White House said, we've got to get more women to the table. How do we do that? I was teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, and Annenberg gave us our first grant. And I started an organization called Women's Campaign International. That was in 1998. So I'm going to fast forward because the theme of what I'm supposed to be speaking about, which I try to behave, I really do, but it's difficult. Maya and I were talking yesterday. I'm really good at not answering a question and sounding as if I have answered it. And so I will try, and I want to hear from you, please, if you have any questions. So the theme of my presentation here was supposed to be basically healthcare. And what we do, Women's Campaign International, is we listen. So we will go to a village, any place, and we will see frankly, just because I love anecdotes, but we'll go to a village and we'll see these women walking with their children, especially their little girls, to get clean water. And some of them do it for 10 hours a day. I mean, to getting clean water. So what do we do when we get there? We can save, WCI can save this whole village thousands of hours if we drill a well, if we help them get a well. And that's, in short, that's what we try to do. We're not arrogant. Often we go in, we do a drive-by and leave. We try not to do that. So that's what I'm going to give you a bunch of examples of what WCI has done over the years, and why going in and listening, why healthcare and education of girls especially is absolutely essential. We've done it in 5 different villages. We've gone in and helped raise enough money to dig wells. Went into Malawi. And we went into Malawi in 2003, and we've been there ever since. And we did a training. We doubled the number of women in parliament. one of our women, which is one of the women, Kalista Chumumbu Wamutarika, went from being a member of parliament to going onto the president's cabinet, and she married him. So it was a huge wow. And what we then had was a first lady. So much of what WCI does is random. And then we had a first ladies initiative in Africa, funded by Rockefeller. So it's just kind of getting there, and she was very, very interested and still is. We just worked in Malawi with a COVID. It was a pilot, which I will tell you about, but it's getting there and listening, and that's what we try to do. It's often a huge challenge. When we were there last time in Malawi, we wanted to make sure that these villages were tested for AIDS. So our women did a whole huge, we quadrupled the number of people who were tested in Malawi for AIDS. One of our women, Marjorie Unje, was tested. She started our class at the University of Pennsylvania. So she came to Penn to start a class entitled Empowering Women in Emerging Democracies. And we decided when she came that we would tackle, it was, I get Malawi and malaria kind of, malaria. We were tackling malaria, and we divided the class into, some of them were dealing with the hospitals, some into 4 different areas. And then we took the class to Malawi to deliver what we had learned. It was absolutely fascinating. Marjorie came to start the class. Unfortunately, when she was tested, she had AIDS. So she is no longer with us. Quite a few of the women who got, not actually, that's not fair, about 1/10 of the women whom we tested, who we were working with, were positive. But what we try to do, and I'll say it over and over and over again, is make sure that when we get there, we not only, of course, listen, but act not arrogantly. And I mean, I'll say it over and over and over again. We get there, we haven't done a great job of, we've done a better job of electing women here. So what are the things that we can share with them that have to do with communications? We went to Liberia, and we got a grant from the head of military operations, who was the head of our delegation, our Pennsylvania delegation. He gave us a grant because we went to him, Jack Murtha was his name, and said to him, look, we're not they are now negotiating peace. Women are not at the table. No women were at the table. So we got a grant, and we went to Liberia, and we worked very carefully with those who were negotiating peace. And the head of the organization that could keep us there said, this is great, USAID. And we got another grant from them, a huge grant. And we stayed in Liberia for a long time. We had 15 employees there. We went around the entire country. And we mainly did what she wanted us to do was communications. How you get your message out, how you get your message out to the press, how you get your message out to local radio stations, etc. We were there for quite a while, and then Ebola hit. What do you do? Well, Ebola is a disease of information. There are 10 things that you have to do to stop the spread of Ebola. Stop the ritual cleansing. If somebody has Ebola coming back to a community, they are rejected. They shouldn't be rejected because they're the ones who are immune. They should be cooking. They should be in the hospitals. So we went around the whole, and if you read anything, it's hard to read, but if you read anything about how Ebola stopped, WCI is mentioned. That's what we do. And it's all connected with, obviously, healthcare, but also with education. When you see those women walking with their little girls, it's a beautiful picture, but it means that the little girls are not being educated. So that's what WCI has done for the last, 20 some years, 23 years. We got a grant. Every now and then we are called in and we're wired for a grant for the MENA region, Middle East and Northern Africa. And we went into 16 different countries. And basically their concerns were exactly the same. They all cross kind of pollinated on education, healthcare, clean water, listening, getting to the table, the peace tables. It was all the same, it kind of in different incarnations. One of the biggest problems that we run into is menstruation. So many girls just drop out of school because they just can't get covered with regard to that. So a lot of some of the things we do are not only pads and cups and all of those things, but it's getting to a place and saying, well, we lose so many of our smartest girls because of menstruation. That still happens. I mean, it's really incredible. You think, how does that, is that it's going on in now, of course, with the problems with just feeding so many of these young girls, or the kids, babies in Africa. It's multiplied by, I'm gonna do a fat, I don't want to.
You have time. It's
Okay.
only 25. You can.
Am
talk,
I
but
allowed to talk a little bit
I
more?
think so.
You are.
Yeah.
You are, absolutely.
Okay.
You
The,
have over 20 minutes to go
Yeah.
if you want.
Oh, I'm not gonna
before
do that.
Q&A.
no, I want to hear from you guys. I want to, one of the things that WCI came to a screeching halt because so much of what we do is international. And when COVID hit, we couldn't travel. We've had a program for more than a dozen years in the United States called the GALS program. It's Girls Advocacy Leadership Series. It's wonderful. It's in marginalized communities. And we decided that that's something that we would grow. And if you have any questions, she's sitting right there. She'll be with you for the rest of the day, Sophia, and she's great. And actually, she's a lawyer. So if you have any questions, I'm sorry, I don't want to put you in. But we did a program because we were in some of the schools. We worked with Temple and got a sub-grant from the CDC recently. And our aim was to work with our GALS programs to make sure that the communities that we were working with weren't afraid of vaccines. So we worked with our gals and we convinced them to convince their mothers, their fathers, their grandmothers, their communities that getting vaccinated was the way to go. And we worked with Temple. It was lovely. But it was a real challenge. And we knew how important it was. And I think we were quite successful. As we were in the midst of all of this, we were on our way, literally on our way, because we have been working many years with the Mandela Fellows, and they come over and then we send a fellow over to Africa in exchange. And we were just about ready to send not only a fellow, but also a program when COVID stopped everything. So one of the things that was happening in these communities is because the girls were not going to school, they were becoming pregnant. So we started a program, and it was called a RAP. I'm crazy with acronyms. I mean, this one means reducing adolescent pregnancy. And we did a program which was fascinating to do because we worked with about 100 girls in Kenya, and the mothers of other girls who couldn't get into the program because we just couldn't expand. We for budget purposes would come to us at the end of the day and say, please accept our young girl. We couldn't do it. None of our girls became pregnant. But the one thing that it blew my mind, the girls didn't know what consent was. They just didn't know. It was that's such a basic conversation. So that's one of the things that we worked on. I could bore you for hours. So why don't we go to some of the questions that we talked about yesterday?
Yeah.
And then please, I'm so much more interested in what's going through your heads now than I am in just bloviating.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all the stories. I'm just going to ask a few questions focusing on women in leadership and the impact of that on public health, and then we'll leave plenty of time for your questions. So I know you've been working on supporting access to healthcare for the American people for a very long time, most famously in casting the deciding vote for President Clinton's omnibus budget bill that included the healthcare plan at the time, and that will ultimately cost you your seat in Congress. I wanted to hear your thoughts on both the political climate you faced in that period of time in casting your vote, and I'd love to hear you discuss comparatively what seems both similar and different today in our current political climate and the battles we continue to have over healthcare, over the Affordable Care Act during the pandemic, and what role you think women did and do play in politics, in political leadership, and the impact that has in these big public health policy moments.
Oh, my God.
It's a big question.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you a little bit about the vote. It's semi-interesting. Trust me. I had said that I didn't think that the bill, this is 1993. Most of you weren't born then. 1993, I had said that I opposed the bill for lots of reasons. I'm supposed to be representing this district. But also, I didn't think it went far enough. I didn't think the cuts were big enough, and I didn't think that, excuse me, that we were dealing with it. Should have been dealing with entitlements, and we weren't. So I walked onto the floor of the House, got a call from Bill, so close. And he said, you know, I don't know if you know, my son is married to Chelsea. So I did not say your firstborn. I swear I did not. But you know, he said, you know, what would it take? And I said, well, you're gonna lose my seat. I mean, this is really tough. You didn't deal with entitlements. You didn't deal with with cuts. You will not be, I don't want you to be against the cuts that we were definitely going to, and he wasn't. It failed by 6 votes or something like that. But I'll only be your last vote. Now, I knew that there had only been 2 votes like that in history. And if any of you know what those 2 votes were, I swear I will make sure she gives you an A. Did you know 2 votes? One was for the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, and the second one was for the draft. So it meant 217, the bill goes down. So the tie is at 218. So I said to him, I said, I'll make sure it doesn't. He would have been a one-term president had this particular piece of legislation not passed. So I said to him, I'll be your last vote, but I'll only be your last vote. And it was a tie. So, and there were, I mean, I tell you, I've actually seen this person since Bob Walker, and I'm going to tell you who he is. Was a Republican from Pennsylvania, and he was jumping up and down, literally jumping up and down in the well, saying, bye bye, Marjorie. He was right. He was an asshole, and he was a fabulous jumper. Anyway, that's what happened. So I was 218. And you have no idea how strange it was. I mean, it was just, it was so strange. They took me through the tunnels to make sure. Anyway, that was the vote. And the thing that amazed me then, and it wasn't the beginning, but it was so, and then Newt came in, and it was so divisive, and so it's become even more nasty. The thing that bothers me most, I mean, especially with Dobbs, I think that Dobbs did a big favor to Democrats. If Democratic women get out, then it's not going to be as much of a disaster as we have been told with, you know, the midterms. The midterms, if the party is in power and, you know, and has representation in the House and Senate, usually is a disaster. Now they are saying it's going to be less of a disaster than normal, but nobody is reading it. And you have to ask her because she knows. These 2 people right here are because of Dobbs and abortion, I think we're in a different place. Does that kind of answer your question?
I mean, that's a good segue, because I know you've also been an advocate for and working on access to reproductive health care
Right.
for a long time. And, one of the things the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade said, and I think Justice Alito said this very sarcastically, but he said, well, you women can vote effectively. Why don't you get out and vote if you want this right? Now, of course, at the same time, the court is, gutting the Voting Rights Act and, chipping away at the right to vote. So I wanted to, hear your thoughts on how do we get more women leaders in politics here in the US? And, for this audience, how can young people get involved, especially those who want to, ensure that we have comprehensive access to reproductive health care in particular?
I just think it's so tough for women. I mean, especially let me back up a little bit and tell you, I adopted 2 kids before I got married. And I married somebody with kids. We had 6 girls. We got married. Then we had 2 boys. And then we had, we've been having, it when we were living in Washington, we always took in refugee families. So we got a request to take in a refugee family. It was a Vietnamese woman and her 4-year-old son. We said, sure. We were in Pennsylvania. And several months later, it turns out that they had 2 nephews. Would you take in the 2 nephews? I said, sure. And several years later, they found her husband. So we had 5 Vietnamese in one family living with us for 25 years. And they were unusual. I mean, they were wonderful. I mean, there were peaks and troughs. But Vu, the little boy who was 4 years old, is now an anesthesiologist, and he's just a gem. So we've kind of been moving around thinking, how in the world we had a family, half of the family was Catholic, half of the family was Jewish. I was telling Maya earlier, Vu, who's just totally adorable, said, my mother wants me to be a priest. I think I'm supposed to be bar mitzvahed. So, I mean, it was a wild place. But where do you want me to go with this?
Well, now that we're pushing so many healthcare issues away from the courts,
Yeah.
right? Particularly reproductive rights, and again.
That was
it's
a really good example of mine not answering that question at all. I mean, I didn't even come close. I'm so sorry.
That's
Yeah.
great, but you were telling me yesterday, the stories of your own impact of a woman in Congress and the impact you had on healthcare.
Yeah.
And sort of, hearing those stories.
Oh, yeah,
And then how, what are we going to do today after?
We
Dobbs?
really did, especially in 92, when we came in, we see it through a different lens. And I'm not sure exactly how I can explain that. We got there, we realized that at the NIH, they were only using male rats. Excuse me? Or in the aspirin study, only males. So it was not that the males were being nasty, they were just clueless. So this is the kind of thing, this is the digging that we did when we got there and had these things change. And that's what's happened as more women are elected. My answer to you, all you here, because I'm sure you're interested, is if you can do it, it is not easy. And become involved in these races, especially in races where you feel passionately with the candidate on any issue. I don't care what it is. And it is not easy. The juggle is extraordinary and honestly exhausting. I just what was it, Sunday? Was in Iceland. And so I'm so jet lagged. If there did I kind of answer that question?
Well, I think I think it would be great to hear, what can students, law students in particular today do to get involved in politics? I mean, it sounds like your story was a bit serendipitous, right? I mean, you were a famous journalist, and so people came to you to run. And so how do you think students today could get involved, especially given that we have such a polarized and challenging political
Get
climate?
involved in a level that you're comfortable with. I don't care what it is. I have a friend who I saw her last night. She has like 2,000 people. 2,000 calls from different people whom she has reached out to, who feel strongly about issues that are obviously impassioned by us, get involved. First of all, it's huge fun. If you're a volunteer, you can leave at any time, and that's completely up to you. But get involved, as I said before, get involved with candidates whom you feel impassioned about, and do it. It's so easy for us to sit back and say, oh my gosh. I mean, I can remember, I was with them on the night that Hillary lost. And then kind of getting into the conversations which we had last night, that, why did Hillary lose? What was it? What I just feel so sorry that the words that were being shared with us were so nasty. And I think that we can get out there and say, wait a minute, what is the sane center? What is the moderate middle? We need more of that. But do you have any questions? Please say yes. Yes.
Loud, very loud.
Outside voice.
Presenting, and how do we get men to care about the solutions that we care about, and like what are ways to not only engage ourselves as a volunteer, but to gather allies as well?
Well, that's a simple question. First of all, there are many men out there who really do engage and who are terrific. What we have to kind of convince them of is that we're not replacing them, that, that we have to work with them and hopefully create the kind of coalition that would work. And then we have to start younger. It's very obvious that many of us at the dinner tables have a different conversation with our boys than we do with our girls. We've got to work on, it's still, I mean, if you talk to young women, they want to go into something that's a little safer, that is teaching, which is wonderful, and they should. Maybe the arts, maybe you name it, something that's nursing, not becoming a physician. We've got to convince our girls that they can do it all. And believe me, it's so tough, and you can't do it all with the same energy or enthusiasm. You just can't. One of the problems is that women who go to Congress, although it's changing, start much later. It means that there are not as many heads of committees who run by women. So we just have to work on it, but understand that if you're going to try and do it all, it's really tough, and it doesn't work out all the time. Does that kind of answer your question? You're just being nice.
Well, let's open it up. People can raise their hands
And from
Yes.
home as well, if you wanna answer, ask questions, please write in the box. Sorry,
Okay.
over there.
Yeah, yes.
You just said sorry. You don't have to say sorry.
you're right.
I'm not gonna apologize. So I grew up in Scandinavia and Norway, and I had a bit of a culture shock moving to the US. Not that we don't have those same different conversations with little girls and little boys, but especially concerning breastfeeding. Why do you think it is that the US is arguably so far behind on breastfeeding? And I feel like there's so many really big issues
Oh,
right
yeah.
now that I feel like it's not really.
Let me admit, I was called the real Dairy Queen. And so, I mean, I was so into breastfeeding, and I went to the Capitol once with my pump, they called it my 2-pack. And I mean, I heard the man say, "You're not going to believe what's in this one." And as of last week, I was with the First Lady of Iceland, who just wrote a book. And so much of it is about that. Well, I mean, a member who has just had a baby comes into a meeting and breastfeeds there. And yes, it's fabulous. It's just, it will not happen in the United States, certainly, certainly not with the divisions that we have. it's definitely worth reading this book. It's called Secrets of the Spot Car, which are just badass women. And she's from Canada, so I highly recommend it. It's a question that we talked about last week in Iceland, when I was in Iceland. Excuse me but I don't know why. I mean, to me, it's so important and so necessary. But so many of the women who are talking about this didn't breastfeed, because it isn't easy in the beginning. Do you have kids? Breastfeed.
Oh,
But it's striking that, we have now we have these policies that are trending towards forced birth, right?
Yeah.
And you take away access to, reproductive health care to prevent conception. But then we don't have policies that support when women and pregnant people actually do give birth.
Or try to feed the kids after they're
Yes.
born. I mean, it's something, it's actually a great question. I think it's going to take a long time before people in general are comfortable seeing a boob out. It's for crying out loud. And anyway, thank you for asking the question. I didn't have a good answer to it, but thank you for answering the question.
If I may say, as an Italian who had a culture shock for many years here, there is a lot of Puritan culture. And when you study history alongside your son, you finally realize, but the Puritan culture that characterized the pilgrim very much still in force. And so it's very much a question of being uncomfortable with the woman's body.
That's the answer. What she said, yeah,
See a hand in the back there?
yes.
Louder.
I'm confused, not confused, sorry. I'm just curious about what are your thoughts with, we're talking about educating men more and trying to engage them more in the conversation, but I'm also interested, I find it interesting of now as a culture and as a society, there's a lot of conflicting messages of, especially social media and, your misogyny or feminism and all these things, and how to tackle that, because it's very conflicting messages that, in a sense, can degrade or support women, and just how to promote a better society.
It's such a great question, but just stick up for what becomes really familiar with your conversation, and don't feel that you have to kind of fit into something that you don't believe in, and speak up. And it's very difficult to do, but get in your head what you believe, which who knows, but I mean, get in your head and be able to be a good debater for those things that you feel passionately about. That's not easy, but it's really important. And it's extremely important in law school. And that is, if you feel and listen to the other side, try to listen to the other side. And not get to the point where you're using naughty words, but speak to them at their level with the kind of, I understand where you're coming from. I in Iceland, there was a woman from Texas, and she was wearing cowboy boots, and she was darling. She really was great. And we kind of started to talk, and I immediately saw where she was coming from. I said, "You helped defeat me." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "NRA." She said, "Yep, I helped defeat you." And then we got into a conversation, and I said to her, "Does anybody need an automatic weapon?" And she said, "No, but the person should have the right to buy one." I mean, what's that? So we got into the conversation, but know your topic. And some of them are really impossible, like that. And then sit there and be ready to argue.
Better for how how can we change mindsets with the conflict going on, again, the conflicting messages,
Well, and people not voting. I mean, just saying, I'm not going to vote for this if it's going to make the Democrats look good, or vice versa. I mean, that's the reason you have to know your issue inside and out. I mean, and be specific, be anecdotal, be specific, but it's very challenging. I mean, I say that, as somebody who just keeps on trying. Yes.
Yeah, kind of related to that question, I'm really glad that you mentioned the ability to like stand up and like debate well. So in my experience as a young woman and then as a woman of color, I've had a lot of white men talk down to me and pretend like I don't know something and that I can tell them that I speak their language, I know their terms of what they're arguing with me about. Then they're sort of on the defensive and then they start to get mad. Because they don't have anything else, they don't have this knowledge to condescend to me with. How do you deal with men who realize that they can't be condescending to you anymore, and then start to get mad at you and then label you as radical or as hysterical, for lack of a better word?
Don't ever cry. No, but the way you start your sentence is, I understand where you're coming from. And then pick something that's been said, believe me, this is not, it's so easy for me to sit here and say this, but pick something that really meant something to you in what they were saying. But let me give you an example. When we were in Italy with wasn't that something?
Wow.
No,
It was.
it was really something.
It was.
We were in Afghanistan and we were training women from Afghanistan, men and women. So the women were here, the men were there, the women were mostly covered, the men were uncovered and a little hostile.
Yeah, very hostile. It was so
A
interesting.
man stood up and said, if they would only understand what is in the Quran, if they would only understand their place, we wouldn't have any problems. So besides, just wanting to say, really, I mean, just besides saying, you jerk, this is what we did. I turned to the women on this side and I said, how would you answer that? And a woman got up. I mean, obviously someone who has come from Afghanistan to listen to our trainings. They were fabulous, knocked it out of the park. So that's kind of what you have to think of doing. That, when you know that this is just outrageous, turn to your other side and say, well, if you knew, and they came up with all different kinds of amazing, if you look at other parts of the Quran, this is what it says. I mean, that's a simplistic way of answering your question, but I understand what you're saying. But the key is not to lose it. And I mean that. And it's very hard as, I've been working on something for really a long time and some jerk comes and says, it's so the key is to listen, pick up a couple of words of what he or she is saying and say, I appreciate what you were saying and you're not alone in that thought. And I'd like to kill you. Yes.
Thank you for coming.
I'm sorry, you
I
didn't-
really
No,
appreciate your talk. I think my question is more about taking a, intersectional approach to, empowering women and like seeing more women in positions of power. Whenever we talk and make this umbrella blanket statements about like we want to see more women in positions of power, it is not just that we want to see more women, we want to see women of color. So how do we change this perspective about when there is, 50 white women, it is enough, like it is enough representation. That is not what I want. How do we like make sure when they're talking?
You want
about
fair
women rights-
representation. Yeah. I actually think that's happening. And I think it's happening at all levels. When I first started on television, in my newsroom, there was one white woman and one African-American woman, and that's all. If you turn on the set now, the representation is startling and so different. And that's where it begins, where you're just very comfortable seeing all different kinds of races and, men, but women especially on television. You're right, and it's extremely difficult. And a lot of it has to do with just plain money. that so many of those who are in these communities can't do what you have to do to be elected. That is, pass out flyers, get on television, et cetera. But I think it's changing.
How do you think like white women can be an ally to move coverage and change that? Yeah, I might not have the opportunities to run my campaign, but you as a woman hold so much power and privilege in society. How are you gonna support?
Well, you have to get together in groups and work together. One of the biggest problems, honestly, and it still exists, is that when we go into a room, and especially like an NGO, a group of NGOs trying to move to the next step, the funding is so limited. So we don't see each other as sisters. We see each other, in an adversarial way. And we've got to stop that. What we've got to do is start to partner. And it's the same thing with your question. We've got to start to partner. I didn't answer your question. I saw your eyes rolling.
No,
No, it's okay. I have children whose eyes roll all the time. They're masters at that.
In the red sweater?
Yes.
Louder.
Thank you for. My question is, what bothers me is like, this is selected as a very far.
Louder.
It hasn't still ratified, the most like international Bureau of Human Rights, CEDAW, it hasn't still ratified it, right? So what's your take on it? Why do you think US has still not ratified it? And also like.
You mean CEDAW?
Because, yes, and also like, if you think this or.
I wish I could say yes. I felt so bad. Well, you can imagine, I mean, I think we are, but it's pushing, it's Sisyphus-y, and it's pushing the rock up the hill. The idea that we have not passed CEDAW is astonishing to me. It's a convention to, eliminate all forms of discrimination against women, and we added children. I just don't know. And especially, I'm not optimistic with what's happening in our Congress, because anything like that goes down or passes by just a couple of votes. So it's a great question, and I don't have the answer for it. But very, very frustrating. But for us, it's to keep the fight going and not give up, and and then convince the groups that she wants left, but that we can work together to make sure these, because some of them are just so darn obvious, and they're not passing, and a lot of it is just is the negativism that I think is taking over and shouldn't. I didn't answer your question, but I tried. You have another question?
Wait, was there another hand up?
One last chance for a question.
Yeah, you don't.
If
Yes.
not, I
Oh,
can
there.
ask. Yeah.
Sorry, hi. I'm gonna try to be loud, but I'm a bit under the weather still. Following up on the question about the United States, in one of our seminars during the summer, we were.
Where are you from?
I'm from Mexico.
Okay.
And so we were talking about Roe versus Wade in one of our classes, women human rights law. And most of the students were Latin Americans, and we were a bit frustrated about thinking in how, after the Supreme Court have reverted the decision of Roe versus Wade, for us it was very clear that we could probably follow up in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, where the United States wouldn't probably offer that benefit for women, and that was very frustrating for students and very likely for many other women in the country. And we were talking about it with one of our professors, and her approach was that probably in a few years, I think she actually said over 10 years, we could readdress, the United States, could readdress how the right for abortion was settled under right of privacy, instead of in another fundamental right.
Right.
Consider in Latin America something.
Which is actually not technically in the Constitution. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was also less contribution in 10+ years. So I would like to know what's your intake or your thoughts about something like that. Can you try to answer it?
Well, yeah, but that's it. That's in your lap.
I'm joking.
No, really, I mean, that's in your lap. For people like me, I mean, if I'm still a pulse and a heartbeat. But it's very important to keep our eye. Over the years, since 73, we always had the conversation, well, you know, nobody's gonna overturn Roe v. Wade. It's just not gonna happen. And all of a sudden, and it was chipped away. And we would talk about it. Oh, come on, it's being chipped away at. So I don't know, I really don't know the answer to that question, but I think we have to, and it will be more answerable after this election. It will be more answerable if women decide, Republicans, Democrats, I don't care who they are, that Dobbs was a mistake and we're going to stick up for our rights. So give me a call after this election, because I think women, I hope women are going to say, wait a minute, you can't cross this line. It is my decision. It is my decision with my priest or my husband or my doctor. It's my personal decision. So yeah, I don't know.
We did see that in Kansas. Women turned out on that
Exactly.
ballot initiative.
Exactly.
And, you know, so
If you have
Yeah.
time, read the book, What's the Matter with Kansas? It's an old book, but it is terrific.
Hmm.
And it happened in Kansas. The fast forward there is going to be if somebody picks it up and writes, that's exactly what's the matter with Kansas. And you'll see, you know, people who were interested in social issues rather than economic issues and really changed that. Yeah.
I think we need to.
Yeah,
wrap
thank
up.
you so much. We could go on for hours,
Oh,
but
please.
thank you so much.
Help
It was
me.
amazing as usual. I am not surprised. Thank you for making the trek, and we're gonna stop, especially for